Hey, welcome back up to the Vinyl Attic, where we talk about all things vinyl, especially great albums. And we're doing this 100 count through of albums that must be in your collection. And I should say, this is not a countdown or the 100 albums that must be in your collection and none other. This is sort of my journey through my record collection, pulling out things that I think are really essential. So that means it's kind of random, and we're going to see a few artists twice. So we've, revisited Dylan and Taylor Swift and Van Morrison, and we're going to do that again because a while back we talked about the incredible soundtrack to the movie 1984 done by the Eurythmics in 1984 and how well that captured the world of Winston Smith. We're going to talk about the Eurythmics again. Their second album, Sweet Dreams, parentheses, are made of this. I think the only album I know that has parentheses. A gateway. It's a gateway drug into a lot of synthetic music. And I wanted to talk about why this album is so important, because I come back to it all the time. I sort of rediscover this album every once in a while, and I think, God, more people need to realize how brilliant this album is. It's their second album. Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart were in a band called The Tourist, which is kind of a, alternative rock band in the very early 80s, and that didn't work out, so they broke that up, and then they started the Eurythmics as a duo. She's a Scottish singer, he's a producer, multi-musician, singer a little bit, and their first album kind of tanked, and then this record came out and changed the landscape of modern music. I'm going to make that argument today, and I hope you'll stick with me for why this record is so significant. The song that everyone knows is The Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. In fact, I first heard it before I could get access to the record. I got the import single. This is the British 12-inch, $3.99, which was a lot to pay for one song in 1983 because it was so out of left field. It was not rock, not disco. I don't know what it was, but it was something completely different. And what it was the opening of the door of a new decade's sound. What do I mean? Well, we think of the 60s and we sort of focus on like 1967 and the psychedelic second part of the 60s. We think of the 70s, we think of disco or punk. The 80s really hadn't quite figured out its sound. It was starting to, and then something in 1981 happens, which is MTV. MTV creates a new aesthetic, which is you got to look cool while you're doing it. You got to look different and unique to bring eyeballs in. And then when the eyeballs come in, then you start hearing the music. And it turns out a lot of the music is not two guitars, bass, and the drums. The music is, more synthetic. In fact, this album was recorded in the attic of a warehouse in Chalk Farm, London. Last time I stayed in London, I stayed at an Airbnb in Chalk Farm. It's kind of just sort of outside of town. And, with a Roland synthesizer and just really stripped down simple, but in that building this incredible landscape of sound. There was like nothing else. And there was stuff happening at the time. There was this sort of new wave of English music that was pushing more synthy dance music. This is an album I bought on Oxford Street when I was going to school in London in 1982 called Modern Dance. And it's OMD, Japan, Human League, Depeche Mode, Heaven 17, Gary Newman, Simple Minds. I mean, it's much more of the synthetic sound was starting to peep through, but MTV sort of split that door open wide. So here it is. This is the sound of the 80s. This is what the 80s are going to be like. And not only are they going to be more synthy and more visual, they're also going to be more androgynous, right? So we're getting groups like Flock of Seagulls that have at least stylistically something in line with Bowie, and we're getting, a lot more men flirting with fashion, and the Eurythmics were a part of that. I mean, Annie Lennox has, basically super short orange hair. In one of the videos, she's wearing a suit. She's always dressed, super androgynous. So we're getting that Bowie vision now playing out into a much wider audience. So that's the visual thing that pulls you in, because now, you're getting home from school and you're flipping on MTV, and you're not seeing REO. You might see a little REO Speedwagon, but what you're getting are these mainly British acts that are just so visually compelling that you're watching, and then the music is like, oh, this is actually good music. It's sort of like a lot of the disco stuff. When you get past all the disco sucks business, there's some good songs in there. So you're being pulled into this, and this album, their second album, comes out right at the beginning of 1983. So you're starting the year off right. The album is a complete landscape, and I've talked a lot about this on this channel, about the ability of an album to create a whole kind of experience, a sonic experience. And I have a little favorite thing that I've never talked about on albums. You know, if you've got a band and they're known for their upbeat music, usually the first song is a banger. You know, you've got a Kiss album, the first song is going to be like out of the gate, let's go, welcome to the party. There is a value in having a band that has upbeat songs. Sweet dreams are made of this. You know, people dance to that song. That starts off slow. That starts off low key. And this album opens with Love is a Stranger, which is a great sort of welcome into this strange world song. That in these harmonies that Annie is singing with herself, and then Dave sings a little bit on it. And then you start moving into the more upbeat songs, The Walk, which is one of my favorite ones, to bring people into welcome to this new world. Hey, the 70s was that. Everybody had long hair, and they were, you know, doing 10-minute guitar solos. This is a whole completely different thing. This is not your Big Brother's rock and roll. We're in a new generation here, and this is what the 80s is going to be, at least for a few years. So you're welcomed into this, and there is a element to this album that is very soundtracky, for lack of a better word. There's a song called Jennifer. Jennifer with your orange hair. Jennifer, where are you tonight? Underneath the water. It's like, it gives me chills every time I listen to it, because it's like watching a David Lynch show. You know, it's just what is going on in this song. Or the last song on the album, which is the longest song, The City Never Sleeps, was used 2 years later on the soundtrack to 9.5 Weeks, which, if you don't know, if you weren't around, was a very provocative, sexy movie starring Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. And the use of that Eurythmics song on it really married the notion of this world that we're living in now has a new soundtrack, and it has a new sound. It's a synthetic, robotic. I mean, we're moving into sort of Blade Runner territory and starting to getting into the not prophecy, but the kind of hints of the virtual reality online world that we would be living in the future. That it was this real feeling in the early 80s. You know, you had Vangelis on the radio or on car commercials. You had neon was kind of a big thing. You had this sense that, oh, this is a very different world we're in. This is the beginning of people starting to get personal computers and getting video games or playing, you know, Atari at home. So it was a whole feeling of this was happening. There's also a great song on this record called This Is the House that has a female speaking lines in Spanish. Esta es la casa, which reminds me a lot of Bowie's Scary Monster. We has a Japanese female speaking Japanese at the beginning of a song. That this is also a globalist experience. That we are now not just like American rock and roll. This is a British band with a Scottish singer with Spanish on it. We're in a kind of globalist world. And again, much more Blade Runner-y as it came out. So this record was very niche for a while. And then thanks to MTV, you know, became more and more popular. And then later in the same year, they released their third album, Touch, which went right to #1. It was huge and had a whole bunch of big hits. And then they kind of went on. They went back in '84 to do this, which was much more, you know, low key. And then the rest of the records were very oriented towards a pop market and selling lots of records. And they did a reunion record in '99 that was all right. But this record is the gateway drug to synth pop. I mean, I would argue that there's a direct link between Kraftwerk, Gary Newman, and then the Eurythmics. That there is this through line about being increasingly cold, but in that coldness of the electronic computer, the warmth of the human voice comes through. And there is this beautiful contrast between the antiseptic computers that are these synthetic sounds that are being created, and the message or the lyric or the female voice in the case of Annie Lennox, as androgynous as she was then, that makes it even more human, brings out the humanness of it, which is something that just pulls you in. Because we feel like we're in this world that's very sterile and everything's online. Where's the humanity? Right there with Annie and her voice, and the contrast between the two is just infinitely compelling. Damn, I love this album. Just listen to, if you only know Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, listen to the rest of the record, and you'll find something that is genius in the melding of melody and sound together. Dave Stewart was brilliant in this project. Again, recorded in an attic in a warehouse. Sweet Dreams. Man, okay. I needed to talk about this record because I pulled it out the other day and I'm like, holy God, I can't do this 100 without talking about this Eurythmics album. All right. Speaking of innovative records, next time we're going to talk about another record that is one that you probably don't know because it doesn't have any hits on it, but is hugely influential, which is the first album by the Slits, Cut, from 1977, I think. We're going to talk about that record and how long it took me to get my hands on it next time. But until then, I mean, this genre, if you weren't there in the early 80s and saying, I want my MTV, and then getting your MTV, and then sitting in front of your MTV and becoming a member of this weird new world of sound, you might not get the deep love that a certain generation of us have for this record. But just imagine what that was like. You can't even imagine it. There is no way of putting yourself in front of a TV screen and then I want my MTV, and then getting it, and now being in this special elite club of people who get to hear this music that's not being played on the radio, REO Speedwagon, and wanting to just know more about it. Love this record. This album matters. The Eurythmics matter. You matter. So let's talk about it.